The morning sunlight touched the marble steps of River Hill Private Bank like gold dust. Inside, everything gleamed: glass, silence, power. And into that quiet world walked Amara Cole, 35. Black, elegant, hair tied high in a smooth bun, wearing a simple white dress that carried more confidence than diamonds ever could. Her heels clicked softly across the floor. She smiled, polite but reserved, holding a thin white envelope in her hand. Inside it was a check large enough to change lives, the final transfer for a youth innovation program her company had just launched. To her, it was routine. To them, it was impossible. "Good morning," she said gently. "I'd like to deposit this." The young teller froze for a split second, eyes darting to the number, then to Amara's face and finally toward the manager's glass office. A small moment. Harmless. But sometimes, history hides inside small moments. The manager, a woman in a gray suit, smiled sharp as a blade stepped out, heels echoing across the lobby. "May I ask where this check came from?" she said, voice sweetened with suspicion. "It's from one of our partner funds," Amara replied, still calm. "Oh? And what is it you do, Miss Cole?" "I'm the founder of Cole Dynamics." Silence. The teller looked down. The manager's smile stiffened. Somewhere behind the counter, a phone line blinked red. In less than 5 minutes, protocol had been weaponized. When the police arrived, Amara didn't resist. She had seen it before: the assumptions, the disbelief, the reflex to criminalize confidence in a black woman's body. The cold metal touched her wrists. Cameras rose. Murmurs filled the marble hall. And yet, as they led her past the golden letters above the entrance, integrity, service, trust, she lifted her chin. Because she knew something they didn't. She wasn't just another customer. She was their largest investor. The air inside River Hill Private Bank was cool and still, the kind of air that seemed to hush people into behaving. Behind the polished counters, screens flickered quietly, and a soft, classical tune played somewhere near the ceiling vents. Amara Cole walked in as if she belonged there because she did. Her white dress caught the morning light. Her hair was tied high in a graceful bun, and in her hand she held a single envelope containing a check worth $850,000. For her, it wasn't about the number, it was about purpose. This check would fund a scholarship program for underprivileged girls in Atlanta, the kind of girls who once looked like her, and once believed banks like this weren't built for them. She smiled at the teller and said softly, "Good morning. I'd like to make a deposit." The teller, a young woman barely in her 20s, smiled back at first, but her expression changed the instant she saw the amount. Her eyes flicked up, lingered on Amara's skin tone, then on the expensive bag she carried. There was a pause, a kind of hesitation that carried generations of bias inside it. "One moment, ma'am," she murmured, before quickly excusing herself and disappearing behind the frosted glass office marked Branch Manager, Priscilla North. Amara sighed quietly. She had seen this before in airports, restaurants, boardrooms everywhere that respect was supposed to be earned but was instead rationed by color. She tapped her nails gently against the counter, her heart calm but alert. The manager appeared moments later, her posture straight, her smile polite but condescending. "Good morning," Priscilla said, her voice smooth as glass. "May I help you?" "I was just depositing this check," Amara replied. Priscilla's eyes skimmed the amount again, then rose to meet hers. "And this came from where, exactly?" "It's from an investment partner," Amara said evenly. "Cole Dynamics, my company." The name hung in the air. The manager tilted her head, as though hearing it for the first time. "Cole Dynamics, I see. And what kind of company is that?" Amara's lips curved slightly. "Fintech. We build systems to detect fraudulent banking activity." The irony didn't land. Priscilla's eyes narrowed. She turned toward the teller. "Let's run enhanced verification." The words fell like a verdict. Enhanced verification, a phrase that sounded professional. But in rooms like these, it had a different meaning. It meant we don't trust you. Amara waited. Minutes passed. The quiet lobby began to feel heavy. People noticed her, the elegant black woman standing alone, waiting too long for something simple. Whispered voices carried from the manager's office. Then, behind the glass wall, Amara caught sight of Priscilla on the phone. Her lips formed the words, "possible counterfeit." Her chest tightened, not from fear, but from disbelief at how predictable it was. She knew what came next. She had built her life to escape this exact moment, and yet here it was again, the double standard. The invisible hierarchy. The assumption that success couldn't belong to someone who looked like her. When the two police officers entered, the world seemed to tilt. One was tall, expressionless. The other rested his hand lightly on his belt, as if it were second nature. "Ma'am," the taller one said, "we've been asked to verify a potential fraud case." "Fraud?" Amara repeated, her voice steady. "I'm a verified client. You can check the system." The manager interjected smoothly. "We're just following protocol, officer. This is a large amount," and she became defensive when asked for verification. "I didn't become defensive," Amara said, eyes locked on the woman. "I became aware." That was the moment the officer stepped closer. The room shrank around her, the marble floors, the cold air, the invisible wall between privilege and suspicion. He reached for her wrist. "Excuse me?" she said, pulling slightly back. "You're making a mistake." "Ma'am, please don't resist." "Resist what?" she asked, incredulous. "Depositing my own check?" The metal cuffs clicked shut. The sound was sharp, final. The crowd of onlookers murmured, phones rising to capture the image. A black woman in a white dress, wrists bound, eyes blazing with controlled fury. Somewhere, a child whispered, "What did she do?" And in that instant, Amara realized the question wasn't new. It had echoed for centuries. What did she do to deserve this? Nothing, except existed, where they thought she didn't belong. As the officers led her toward the glass doors, sunlight poured over her like a cruel spotlight. But even then, she lifted her chin. Her voice, quiet yet unbroken, carried through the silence. "Call your regional director. Tell him his largest investor has just been arrested in her own bank." The words froze everyone in place. The teller's eyes widened. Priscilla's confident smile faltered. The officers hesitated, unsure whether they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. But it was too late. The damage was done, the humiliation public, the prejudice undeniable. Outside, cameras clicked and sirens hummed. Amara's reflection glimmered against the police car window, strong, beautiful, furious. She knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning of a fight much larger than herself, a fight where silence was no longer an option. And as the door slammed shut, the story of the check that should have cleared truly began. The drive to the precinct felt longer than it really was. The air inside the police car was thick with silence and the faint hum of the radio. Amara sat upright, her wrists still cuffed, the steel biting into her skin. She stared out the window, watching the city blur by the same city where she'd once been celebrated as a trailblazer in business, now seeing her as a suspect. Her reflection in the glass looked like someone else entirely. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, her voice controlled. "There's been a mistake." The officer in the passenger seat chuckled without looking back. They always say that. At the station, the fluorescent lights hummed above her as the booking process began. Each sound, the slam of a file drawer, the scribble of a pen, the clack of a keyboard pressed into her nerves. The officer processing her looked bored. He didn't ask questions, didn't make eye contact. He simply filled out the forms and labeled her property bag with the same indifference he might give to a parking ticket. "Occupation?" he asked. "CEO," Amara replied, her tone even. The man raised an eyebrow, half amused. "Sure you are," he muttered, writing something else on the form. Across the room, she could hear the officers from earlier laughing with a colleague. "That lady in white thought she was somebody," one said. "She sure did," another replied. Bet the check came straight from her cousin's printer. Their laughter was low but deliberate, the kind that seeks to humiliate rather than amuse. Amara's jaw tightened. She had heard it all before, the coded language of disbelief, the laughter that followed a stereotype dressed as a joke. But this time, she wasn't powerless. She memorized badge numbers, noted the time, and the sound of each voice. Evidence, she thought. Always gather evidence. When the door opened, a man in a dark suit stepped in, his presence cutting through the noise. Assistant District Attorney Grant Keller, known for his tough stance on financial crimes, entered with a small entourage. His tone was clipped, efficient. "This is the suspect?" he asked. "Yes, sir," one of the officers said quickly. "Possible counterfeit check, large amount." Manager verified the inconsistency. Keller didn't even look at Amara at first. "Let's run her prints, process her, and freeze the funds until verification." That was when Amara spoke. "You'll want to be careful," she said calmly. "Those funds are tied to a federal investment grant. Every transaction is already monitored by the Treasury Department." Keller's pen stopped mid-air. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward her. "And how would you know that?" "Because I'm the one who signed the compliance agreement," she replied. "My company Cold Dynamics built the system that monitors fraudulent banking activity. You're using my software." The room went still. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. Keller studied her face, looking for weakness, for any crack in her composure. But there was none. "Then you'll understand why we can't take chances," he said finally, recovering his balance. "Protocol is protocol." "Protocol," she repeated, the word heavy with irony. "That's what people call it when they need to hide their prejudice behind paperwork." His jaw tightened. "Be careful, Miss Cole." "Funny," she said softly. "That's what I was going to tell you." Minutes later, she was led into an interrogation room, cold, windowless, a single camera blinking red in the corner. Keller stood at the far end of the table, file in hand. "Let's make this simple," he said. "If this check turns out to be counterfeit, you're looking at felony charges for attempted fraud." Amara leaned forward, her hands still cuffed to the table. "And when it doesn't?" she asked. "When it clears, and you realize you arrested your own institution's top investor?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said everything. Outside the room, the manager, Priscilla North, waited nervously. She was speaking quietly with another officer, unaware that the hallway cameras were still recording. "You understand why I had to call?" she whispered. She didn't look like someone who'd have that kind of money. The officer shrugged, indifferent. "You did what you thought was right." But the recording caught every word. Back in the room, Amara's calm began to shift into something sharper, not anger, but resolve. She knew the world would watch soon enough. Someone in that lobby had filmed everything. The footage would surface. It always did. And when it did, she would make sure the truth wasn't just seen, it would change something. As they escorted her back to the holding area, she walked taller than before, her wrists bruised but her spirit unbroken. Each step echoed off the tiled floor, a rhythm of quiet defiance. "Protocol," she murmured again under her breath. "The perfect shield for prejudice." But that shield was about to crack. And when it did, it wouldn't just expose the people who arrested her, it would reveal a system built on the illusion of fairness, where justice had been replaced by procedure. The battle had only just begun. The night air outside the precinct was cold when Amara was finally released on temporary verification hold. She walked out without her purse, without her phone, only a copy of the incident report stapled to a thin white form that said case pending review. The humiliation still burned beneath her calm exterior. But inside that same calm, something sharper was forming focus. She had built her career on uncovering hidden corruption in the banking world. Now, the same system had dared to label her a criminal. And if there was one thing she knew, it was how to trace a lie back to its source. Back home, the city lights flickered across the glass walls of her apartment. She sat at her dining table, bruises still visible on her wrists, and opened her laptop. Her fingers moved with precision, accessing encrypted channels, bypassing the standard firewalls of the bank's digital network. Every transaction leaves a fingerprint, she thought, even deceit. Within minutes, she was inside Riverhill's internal ledger, and what she found made her blood run cold. There, tucked between legitimate transactions, were dozens of micro-deposits each, just under $9,000 recurring weekly, routed through veterans' charities that didn't exist in federal registries. Each entry was authorized by the same signature, Priscilla North, the same manager who had called the police on her, the same woman who had looked her in the eye and said, "We're just following protocol." Amara's eyes narrowed. "So, that's your protocol," she whispered. She cross-referenced the entries with her own software, Cold Dynamics fraud detection engine. The system instantly flagged 15 matches to known shell company networks. It was a web of money laundering disguised as philanthropy, using security checks as a cover to freeze or reroute legitimate accounts. And now, it was clear why she had been targeted. Her check had tripped the wrong wire. The real criminals couldn't afford her software to catch their trail. She reached for her phone, dialing her operations director, Malik. "I need you to pull the Riverhill API logs for the last quarter," she said. "Something's off." "You okay, boss?" His voice came, concerned. "I saw the video. I'm fine," she cut in. But they're hiding something bigger. Priscilla North isn't just a bigot with a badge. She's laundering money through their charity accounts. There was silence on the other end. Then Malik said, "That's huge. You sure you want to go after them alone?" Amara's voice softened but stayed firm. "I'm not alone. I have the truth. That's always enough eventually." She closed her laptop and stared out at the skyline. The city glowed beneath her like circuitry, a map of power, greed, and opportunity. She knew how these stories ended for most people of color. Silenced, discredited, erased. But she had one advantage. She understood the system better than anyone inside it. She had written part of its code. Meanwhile, across town, in a sleek corner office of River Hill Private, Priscilla paced. The phone on her desk buzzed. It was Grant Keller, the assistant district attorney. "You told me this would be clean," Priscilla hissed. "Just another suspicious deposit." "It was clean," Keller replied calmly, "until you arrested the wrong person." "Wrong? She's not just anyone. She's Amara Cole, founder of the fintech company that built half the compliance software we use. Do you understand what that means?" Silence. "She's already digging," Keller continued. "And if she connects you or me to those shell accounts, we're done." "What do we do?" "Buy time," Keller said. "Discredit her. Leak something. Make the narrative fit." Priscilla's eyes darted toward her monitor, where the internal memo labeled Enhanced Verification Incident, VIP Client, blinked like a curse. She opened a new message, typing quickly to the bank's PR director. Subject: Urgent Narrative Control. We may have a fraudster impersonating an executive. At that exact moment, Amara's system pinged again. Another alert. Unauthorized access detected. Someone inside the bank's network was attempting to alter transaction logs, erasing traces of the fake charities. She leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Not today," she whispered. Her fingers flew across the keys, launching a countertrace. Within seconds, she captured the IP address River Hill's downtown branch. The evidence was undeniable. The very people who accused her of fraud were the ones committing it. When she leaned back, exhaustion washed over her. But so did clarity. The arrest hadn't been random. It was strategic, an act of erasure. They thought public humiliation would make her retreat quietly. Instead, it gave her motive. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, shaking the windows. Amara stood by the glass, her reflection illuminated by flashes of lightning. "They used protocol to shame me," she said quietly. "Now I'll use truth to destroy their protocol." Her phone buzzed again, a text from Malik. "Got the logs. You're right. There's a second ledger offsite. Hidden server." Amara's eyes lifted, a spark igniting behind them. "Then that's where we go next," she whispered. As the storm deepened outside, so did her resolve. This was no longer just about her dignity. It was about exposing the lie that hid beneath the word procedure. The same lie that had justified centuries of prejudice, polished, repackaged, but still alive. And tomorrow, when the world woke up, River Hill would no longer be the one holding the narrative. She would. Morning light crept through the curtains of Amara's penthouse, washing the marble floor in pale gold. The city below buzzed back to life as if nothing had happened. But for her, everything had changed. She hadn't slept. The images replayed over and over, the cuffs, the whispers, the flash of disbelief in the eyes of the people watching her being treated like a criminal. Yet beneath the exhaustion sat something steady. Purpose. She had the ledger, the digital fingerprints, the proof. And she knew River Hill's pristine facade was about to crack. She stood in front of the mirror, tying her hair into the same high bun as the day before, not out of vanity, but out of defiance. That bun had been seen in headlines now. Every major news outlet was running the footage of the arrest at River Hill. But the spin was already changing. Overnight, anonymous sources had begun circulating stories questioning her background, hinting that she'd used forged credentials to build her company. They were trying to rewrite her story before she could tell it herself. When her assistant, Lila, arrived, she looked shaken. "You've seen what they're saying online?" she asked. "They're calling it a misunderstanding, but they're painting you like some angry executive who overreacted." Amara exhaled slowly. "That's the beauty of racism wrapped in professionalism," she said. "They don't need to call you the word. They just call you uncooperative." She turned back to her laptop. The hacked files from River Hill glowed on the screen. "They're scrubbing evidence," she said. And someone's helping them. She pointed to the metadata of the deleted entries. Each alteration had been authorized using an external clearance code belonging to the district attorney's office. Lila's eyes widened. That's impossible. Not impossible, Amara corrected. Predictable. She leaned closer to the screen, tracing each transaction like she was mapping a heartbeat. Her software showed that the shell charities funneled millions into political donation accounts, most of them linked to the same 3 surnames: North, Keller, and Marston, the current chairman of River Hill's board. This isn't just one branch manager covering her tracks, Amara murmured. This is systemic, generational. Across town, a press conference was underway. Priscilla North stood behind a podium, her gray suit immaculate, her voice measured. Cameras flashed as she read from a prepared statement. Yesterday's incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Our staff acted in accordance with standard verification protocols. River Hill Private remains committed to integrity and equality for all our clients. She smiled, every inch the image of corporate civility. But her eyes betrayed the tension beneath. Behind her, the bank's logo shimmered like armor River Hill. Integrity, security, trust. As reporters fired questions, one woman spoke up sharply. Miss North, why did your team call the police on a known VIP client? Priscilla hesitated. We were unaware of her status at the time, she said, the corners of her mouth twitching. Had we known, the situation would have been handled differently. The reporter pressed again. So a person's treatment depends on their status? Priscilla froze for half a beat before her smile returned. That's not what I said. The clip went viral within the hour. On social media, people dissected every second of her hesitation. Check her bias trended globally. Civil rights advocates called for investigations into River Hill's history of discrimination. But behind closed doors, the boardroom lights burned late into the night. In that meeting, Chairman Marston sat at the head of the table, tapping his pen against the polished wood. We're not dealing with a public relations issue, he said. We're dealing with a woman who has access to our systems. If she releases those files, we're finished. Grant Keller, the ADA, adjusted his cufflinks. We can manage the fallout, he said coolly. The court of public opinion fades quickly. We just have to make her look unstable, emotional. People believe that faster than facts. Marston leaned back. Then do it. Discredit her before she discredits us. That night, Amara received an email from an unknown address. Attached was a single video surveillance footage from the booking room. In it, she was seen speaking calmly to officers, but the audio had been replaced. Her words were twisted, spliced to sound aggressive. A caption appeared beneath. CEO threatens police, in custody. Lila covered her mouth. They're framing you. I know, Amara said quietly. It means they're scared. She stood, walking toward the window. The skyline shimmered below her, powerful and deceptive, just like River Hill's brand of respectability. They hide behind their logos, their glass walls, their polite smiles, she said softly. But corruption wears a suit better than anyone. As lightning flashed in the distance, Amara turned back to her desk. Tomorrow, she said, we stop being polite. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found one name, Elias Grant, investigative journalist and old friend. She hit call. Elias, it's Amara. A pause. I saw the footage. I was waiting for you to call. I have something you'll want to see, she said. And when you do, the world will too. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, echoing like a drumbeat of reckoning. The mask of respectability was cracking, and beneath it lay the face of a system terrified of the truth. The following morning carried a deceptive calm. Sunlight danced across the skyline as if the storm had passed, but beneath that light, River Hill was unraveling. In the executive suite of the bank's headquarters, walls of tinted glass reflected a different kind of weather panic hidden behind professionalism. Priscilla North stood at the window, clutching a cup of untouched coffee, her reflection trembling slightly in the glass. Behind her, Chairman Marston's voice filled the room like static. Damage control. That's all that matters right now, he said, his tone clipped. The press is circling, investors are nervous, and this woman, this Amara Cole, has become the face of every complaint we've buried for years. Priscilla tried to steady her breath. I followed protocol, sir. I didn't mean... He cut her off. Intentions don't matter. Optics do. Across the room, Grant Keller, the assistant district attorney, flipped through a folder of documents. "We can spin this," he said smoothly. "I'll push the narrative that she's retaliating against the bank because her company lost a major contract last quarter. If we make her motive look personal, the rest will fade." "Can you prove that?" Marston asked. "I don't need to prove it," Keller said. "I just need to plant it." They exchanged a look, the kind shared by people who had turned deceit into habit. Outside the office, employees passed by unaware of the conspiracy unfolding behind the mirrored glass. To the world, River Hill still gleamed like success. Inside, it was rotting. That same morning, Amara met Elias Grant at a small cafe tucked away in Midtown, quiet enough for conversation, crowded enough for camouflage. Elias looked older than she remembered, his eyes sharp but tired, like a man who'd stared at too much corruption for too long. "You've stirred up quite a storm," he said, setting his recorder on the table. "They started it," Amara replied, stirring her tea. "I'm just showing people what it looks like up close." She slid a flash drive across the table. "This is everything. The ledger, the routing numbers, the hidden server. And one more thing, the voice recording from my arrest. The original, unedited version." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You kept a backup?" "Every system I build backs up to a private mirror server. I learned a long time ago never to trust official storage." He smiled, faintly. Smart woman. He plugged the drive into his laptop. Within seconds, his expression shifted from interest to disbelief. They funneled over $9 million through fake veterans' charities, all with federal matching grants. Jesus, Amara, this isn't just prejudice. It's organized corruption. "I know," she said softly. "And they used my humiliation to distract from it. They thought handcuffs would make me silent. They don't know me." Elias leaned forward. "If we release this, it won't just expose the bank. It'll hit the DA's office, maybe even the city council. Are you ready for that?" Amara met his gaze. "I'm ready for the truth. I've lived under their glass ceilings my whole life. I think it's time they see who's standing on the other side." Across town, in the dim light of his office, Keller received a text. "The journalist is digging. Move faster." He frowned, typing back. "Working on it. Tonight." Then he dialed a number. "Priscilla, listen carefully. I need you to delete the secondary ledger, the off-site one. Now." "I can't," she whispered. "She's already copied it." Keller's tone hardened. "Then we'll make her evidence inadmissible. Anonymous tip, stolen data, breach of client privacy. If she leaks it, we'll charge her." But neither of them knew that Amara had anticipated that move. Before handing the drive to Elias, she'd already submitted the data through encrypted channels to federal regulators. "They won't be able to bury this one," she murmured to herself. That evening, Elias's article dropped like a thunderclap. The headline read, "From Investor to Suspect. Inside the Racist Arrest That Exposed a Multi-million-dollar Banking Scheme." It went live at 7:42 p.m. Within an hour, it had been shared across every major network. The footage of Amara's arrest played beside excerpts from the ledger. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Justice for Amara, banking bias, River Hill exposed. Phones buzzed. Statements were demanded. And behind the glass walls of River Hill's headquarters, chaos erupted. Reporters crowded the lobby. Investors demanded emergency meetings. Employees whispered in hallways, afraid to say the wrong thing. In her apartment, Amara watched the coverage unfold, her heart a mix of relief and dread. Lila sat beside her, hand trembling slightly as she held her phone. "You did it," she whispered. "No," Amara said quietly. "We started it." The screen showed Priscilla leaving the building under a hail of flashbulbs, her once perfect posture crumbling under the weight of scandal. The anchor's voice narrated, "The Department of Justice has confirmed it will review claims of discriminatory practices and financial misconduct within River Hill Private Bank." Amara set her cup down, her voice calm but steady. "They built their power behind glass walls," she said. "But glass doesn't protect you forever. Eventually, it lets the light in." And as the city outside shimmered with evening reflections, the first cracks in River Hill's empire finally began to show. By dawn, River Hill Private Bank no longer smelled of power, it smelled of fear. Reporters crowded the marble steps, microphones stretched like bayonets toward the glass doors. Inside, the hum of anxiety drowned out the usual quiet luxury. Employees whispered in corners. Phones rang unanswered. The world had seen the footage. They'd read the ledger. There was no more hiding behind words like procedure or protocol. The storm had arrived, and it had Amara Cole's name written all over it. In the boardroom on the top floor, the city skyline looked almost cruel blue and bright, mocking the chaos beneath. Chairman Marston sat at the head of the table, his silver hair slicked back, his expression cold. Priscilla North sat 2 seats down, hands clasped tightly, while Grant Keller stood near the projector, his calm facade beginning to crack. The walls that once displayed awards for excellence in community banking now seemed to echo with irony. "This is a coordinated attack," Marston began. "We need to treat it as such." "An attack?" Priscilla's voice wavered. "Sir, that woman was humiliated in our lobby. The footage doesn't lie. We can't spin this forever." Marston turned his gaze on her, sharp as a blade. "You think this is about her humiliation? It's about control. We control the story, we control the outcome. That's how it's always been." Keller interjected, his tone tight. "With all due respect, the DOJ investigation changes everything. They've frozen our internal systems. If they find those off-ledger accounts—" "They won't," Marston snapped. "We've survived worse." He looked directly at Priscilla. "Unless someone here makes us look weak." Her throat tightened. "I did what you told me. I followed orders." He leaned back in his chair. "Then I suggest you keep doing that." The room fell silent. Outside the glass, thunder rolled low over the skyline, though the sky remained clear. It was the sound of tension itself, reverberating through every floor of the building. Meanwhile, across town, Amara sat in Elias's office, surrounded by stacks of printed evidence. He was on his 3rd cup of coffee, scrolling through the DOJ's early response documents. "They've confirmed internal subpoenas for Marston, Keller, and North," he said. "And get this, they found offshore transfers connected to Marston's family trust." Amara folded her arms, generational power hiding behind generational prejudice. The pattern never changes. Lila entered with her phone buzzing. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly. She played a live stream from Channel 7, Keller at a podium, his tone righteous, eyes full of false conviction. "We must remember," he declared to the cameras, "that false accusations can destroy reputations. This entire situation began from a misunderstanding magnified by social media outrage. We must let due process run its course." Amara's jaw clenched. "He's trying to flip it to make me the villain who overplayed her hand." Elias looked up. "That's the oldest play in the book. Make the victim look irrational, emotional, or vindictive. Then it's time to change the playbook," she said, standing. Hours later, she walked into River Hill's marble lobby again, not as a suspect, but as a storm in heels. Cameras followed her every step. Her dress was navy this time, sharp and formal, her expression unreadable. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to stop her or salute her. "I have a scheduled meeting," she said evenly. "Board review 9 a.m. Security cleared her after a brief call upstairs. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, the entire boardroom froze. Marston's pen paused mid-air. Keller straightened his tie. Priscilla looked pale, her eyes flickering with something that wasn't guilt, it was fear. "Miss Cole," Marston said smoothly, "this isn't an appropriate—" "I believe it is," she interrupted. "You invited me here years ago to discuss partnerships. I think it's time we discussed accountability instead." Keller crossed his arms. "This is private property, and I'm still one of your top shareholders," she said, cutting him off again. "I've reviewed the corporate charter. That means I'm entitled to attend emergency meetings that concern shareholder integrity. Unless, of course, you've rewritten that rule too." The tension in the room thickened. Keller opened his mouth, but Marston lifted a hand. "Let her speak," he said. Amara placed a folder on the table, the soft thud echoing like a verdict. "These are the unredacted ledgers," she said. "The ones you thought you deleted. Every dollar that passed through fake charities, every name that signed off. Your signatures, Mr. Chairman, and yours, Mr. Keller." For the first time, Marston's composure faltered. "Where did you get this?" "From your servers," she said. "But don't worry, the DOJ already has a copy. This," she tapped the folder, "is just for show." Keller's face flushed red. "You hacked us. That's illegal." "So is money laundering," she replied softly, "and discrimination." The silence stretched until the only sound was the ticking of the boardroom clock. Then Amara stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough for the microphones in the ceiling to catch it. You called the police because you couldn't imagine a black woman holding that much power. But now, every lens in this country is watching you try to explain why you called them in the first place. Her words lingered like smoke. She turned and walked out, her heels echoing against the marble floor. Behind her, the men scrambled, their empire collapsing beneath the weight of its own arrogance. Outside, thunder finally broke, and rain streaked down the glass walls of River Hill, washing the city clean, or trying to. Amara didn't look back. The storm she had started inside that boardroom was only beginning to spread. Rain lashed against the glass towers of downtown as the storm thickened, thunder rolling like a slow drumbeat of reckoning. The morning news was relentless. River Hill's logo flashed on every channel, accompanied by headlines like, "Financial Giant Under Federal Investigation." Faces that once smiled from polished advertisements now looked gray and cornered. The empire that had dressed itself in prestige was drowning in scandal, and at the center of it all stood Amara Cole. She sat in her office, surrounded by silence and flickering screens. Her company, Cole Dynamics, had gone into crisis mode. Emails poured in from investors and board members, some expressing support, others worried about the fallout. "You're making powerful enemies," her CFO warned during a video call. "If they go down, they'll drag everyone with them, including you." Amara leaned back in her chair, eyes steady. "Let them try," she said. "Power built on lies is always temporary." Still, the reality was harsh. Her name had become both a rallying cry and a target. On social media, she was hailed as a hero by some and accused of being a race-baiting opportunist by others. Talk shows debated her motives, and pundits dissected her calm composure in that viral arrest video. "It's always the same," she whispered to Lila, who sat nearby scrolling through updates. "They question your anger when you fight, and your silence when you don't." At that very moment, in a private suite on the 41st floor of the courthouse annex, Grant Keller was pacing. His suit jacket hung over a chair, sleeves rolled up, his face pale and tight. The DOJ had issued formal subpoenas. Investigators had seized hard drives, phone records, and even his private emails. But Keller wasn't just worried about legal exposure, he was worried about his reputation. "They can't prove I knew," he muttered to himself, but the words sounded thin, hollow. Then the door opened, and Marston entered, umbrella dripping, expression grim. "You told me she could be silenced," the old man said. Keller snapped. "And you told me your systems were clean. They weren't." Marston's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk to me about clean. I built this bank from nothing. I bought senators, judges, and mayors to keep it alive. You think one woman can tear it down?" "She already has," Keller shot back. They stood there for a moment, two men used to controlling outcomes, realizing they'd lost control. Outside, a flash of lightning illuminated their faces, lined with anger and fear. The facade of their power was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of exposure. Meanwhile, Amara's phone buzzed with a message from Elias. "Meet me. You need to see this." 10 minutes later, she was in the back of his car, the city lights streaking past in the rain. Elias handed her a tablet. On the screen was a leaked video grainy, filmed in a dark conference room. It showed Keller and Marston days earlier, discussing how to handle her. Marston's voice was unmistakable. "If she leaks anything, we'll play the race card in reverse. Make her look unstable, angry. That always works." Amara's stomach tightened. "Where did this come from?" Elias hesitated. "An internal source. Someone inside the bank wants to help." She studied the screen for a long moment, then looked up. "This changes everything." By nightfall, the footage hit the internet. It spread faster than any of the bank's denials ever could. The hypocrisy was undeniable, the language unmistakable. Every major network replayed the clip with subtitles. The words, "That always works," echoing like a confession. The next morning, River Hill's stock plummeted. The board called an emergency meeting to vote on Marston's suspension. Priscilla North, now visibly shaken, appeared before the cameras outside her home, voice trembling. "I made a terrible mistake," she said, tears smudging her mascara. Miss Cole didn't deserve what happened. None of this should have happened. For a brief moment, Amara felt the weight lift, but only for a moment. She knew the apology wasn't for her, it was for optics, for survival. True accountability hadn't arrived yet. At noon, she received a call from a blocked number. "Miss Cole?" a man's voice said. This is Agent Morrison with the DOJ. We'd like your cooperation in expanding the investigation. What you started could expose an entire network. Her voice stayed calm, but her pulse quickened. Then let's finish what we started, she said. That evening, as the sun bled red over the skyline, Amara stood at her window, watching the city shimmer beneath the storm. Lila approached quietly. You think they'll ever really pay? Amara turned toward her. Maybe not all of them, she said softly, but enough to make the next one think twice. She looked back out at the city lights, her reflection ghosted in the glass, strong, unyielding, radiant. The woman they tried to humiliate had become the face of their undoing. The glass towers of River Hill still stood tall, but inside them, their credibility had already collapsed. And now, the only thing left was the sound of the storm, steady, relentless, and cleansing. The next day dawned strangely quiet, the kind of silence that always came before something irreversible. River Hill's headquarters, once a temple of wealth and influence, was now surrounded by media vans and protesters holding signs that read, "Dignity is not a privilege," and "Justice for Amara." The glass facade reflected their faces, a distorted collage of voices that refused to be ignored. Inside, chaos ruled behind polished doors. Executives whispered in corridors, deleting emails, shredding files, praying the DOJ's sweep wouldn't reach their floor. But it already had. Agents in navy jackets moved methodically through the lobby, collecting hard drives and documents under the watchful eye of federal cameras. Amara's name was on every investigator's lips. The woman they'd tried to humiliate was now the key witness in a federal case that threatened to dismantle a financial dynasty. Amara stood across the street in a charcoal coat, her hair pinned back, face unreadable as she watched the institution she'd once trusted implode. Elias joined her, breath visible in the cool morning air. "They're saying you'll be called to testify before the Senate committee," he said quietly. Amara didn't look away from the building. Good. They've hidden behind policy long enough. Let them explain how policy became prejudice. Across town, in his office that now felt like a cage, Grant Keller stared at his reflection in the window. The walls were bare, his plaques and commendations already packed away. His phone buzzed non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, investigators. He ignored them all. The leaked recording had destroyed him overnight. Once the city's star prosecutor, he was now the embodiment of systemic rot. The very arrogance that made him powerful had become the rope around his neck. He reached for the whiskey on his desk, but before he could pour, the door opened. 2 federal agents entered, their expressions impassive. "Mr. Keller," one said, "you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and evidence tampering." The handcuffs clicked, a cruel echo of the sound Amara had heard days earlier in the bank lobby. For the first time, the enforcer of injustice became the accused. As they led him past the reporters waiting outside, the cameras flashed, and he realized what true exposure felt like. At River Hill, Priscilla North sat under harsh fluorescent lights in an interrogation room, trembling hands folded tightly on the table. Gone was the elegance, the control, the professional armor. She looked small, fragile. The investigator across from her slid a photo forward Amara's mugshot from the day of the arrest, wrists cuffed, eyes calm but burning. "You called 911, the investigator said, voice even. "You triggered the sequence that led to this arrest. Why?" Priscilla swallowed hard. "Because I didn't believe her. I thought the check was fake." "Because of the amount?" Her lips quivered. "Because of her." The words hung heavy in the air. Not just an admission, but a truth centuries old. Meanwhile, Amara was at the Department of Justice building, reviewing her witness statement. Her lawyer, a seasoned black woman named Denise Ford, looked at her with admiration. "You realize what you've done, right? You didn't just expose a fraud ring, you changed the conversation. People will study this case for years." Amara smiled faintly, though her eyes carried the fatigue of someone who'd been both the story and the wound. "Change doesn't happen in headlines," she said softly. "It happens when people stop mistaking bias for protocol." The Senate hearing took place 3 days later. The chamber was packed journalists, activists, bankers, and politicians, all hungry for spectacle. Amara's voice, clear and calm, cut through the murmurs. "Discrimination doesn't always wear a uniform," she said. "Sometimes it wears a suit and smiles politely while denying you dignity. It calls it policy, compliance, and verification. But what it really means is, you don't look like someone who belongs here. The room was silent. Cameras zoomed in on her face, the same one that had been handcuffed on live footage, now commanding a nation's attention. She finished her statement with quiet conviction. Justice doesn't begin when the powerful admit their guilt. It begins when the powerless stop asking for permission to be seen. Outside the building, the crowd erupted into applause. The chant rose again, echoing through the Capitol. Dignity is not a protocol. That evening, Amara stood on her balcony overlooking the city lights. Rain had returned, softer this time, washing the world below in silver streaks. Lila joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "It's over," she said gently. Amara shook her head. "It's only over when the next woman doesn't have to go through what I did." She looked down at her wrists, the faint marks still visible, reminders of how power can bruise both skin and spirit. But as she lifted her eyes to the skyline, the clouds parted slightly, letting the light through. The city shimmered again, not perfect, not healed, but illuminated. And somewhere deep inside, Amara knew the storm she'd unleashed was not destruction, it was cleansing. Tomorrow, the world would wake to a new kind of clarity. The understanding that respect should never depend on complexion, and that the truest justice is the kind that forces even glass towers to reflect their own truth. The story had spread beyond America. From London to Lagos, from Seoul to São Paulo, people were talking about the woman who turned humiliation into justice. The video of Amara's testimony had been replayed millions of times. Commentators called it the turning point for corporate accountability. But inside Amara, the victory felt complicated. She had fought an empire and survived, but survival was not enough. Deep down, she knew. The system would adapt, reshape itself, and try to reclaim its innocence. Real change is needed to burn deeper than one scandal. That morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in: journalists, activists, invitations for interviews, corporate statements claiming zero tolerance for bias. Even other CEOs, mostly white men, posted their solidarity hashtags, smiling in tailored suits. Lila scrolled through the feed, shaking her head. They're turning your pain into their marketing. Amara looked up from her coffee, weary but composed. Of course they are, she said. That's what institutions do. They sell apologies like products. She paused, gazing out at the city skyline through the rain-speckled window. We'll make them pay in something they understand: policy, money, reputation. At Coal Dynamics headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Her legal team was coordinating with the DOJ on the next phase of the investigation. Dozens of whistleblowers from other banks had come forward. It wasn't just Riverhill anymore. The scandal had cracked open the facade of an entire financial network. Elias arrived mid-morning, waving a newspaper. The front page showed Marston being escorted by federal marshals, his face pale, his legacy dissolving in the flash of cameras. "It's official," Elias said. "Marston's indicted. They're calling it the Riverhill racket, and Keller's pleading guilty." Amara took the paper, scanning the photo. "He looks smaller," she murmured. Elias nodded. "Guilt does that." She leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. "This isn't the end. It's just the exposure. We still have to rebuild what they broke: faith in fairness, dignity in systems that were never built for us." Later that day, she visited the community center named after her father, the Cole Institute for Equity and Innovation, the very program the original check had been meant to fund. The building was still under construction, with scaffolding and fresh paint everywhere, but children played outside under the supervision of volunteers. The sight softened something in her chest. This was why she'd fought, so these kids wouldn't have to fight the same invisible battles. A local reporter recognized her and approached timidly. "Miss Cole, can I ask, after everything, do you forgive them?" Amara smiled faintly, her voice quiet but strong. "Forgiveness isn't freedom," she said. "Accountability is. Forgiveness without change just teaches oppressors they can do it again." Meanwhile, at Riverhill's shattered headquarters, the remaining executives huddled for what they called a crisis review. The boardroom, once adorned with glass trophies, now looked like a war zone of documents and shattered egos. A new interim CEO, a young black woman named Nadine Turner, had been appointed under DOJ oversight. "We can't erase what happened," Nadine told them, "but we can decide what happens next. No more coded language, no more hidden policies. Transparency is not a threat, it's survival." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. River Hill's rebirth was being led by a woman who looked like the one they had once tried to destroy. That night, Amara sat by the window in her penthouse, rain tapping rhythmically on the glass. Lila walked in, holding a thick envelope. "From the DOJ," she said. "Official notice. They're naming you the primary corporate ethics advisor for the Reform Committee." Amara blinked, surprised. "They want me to help rebuild the system that broke me?" Lila smiled softly. "Who better?" For a long moment, Amara said nothing. She traced the rim of her coffee mug with her thumb, thinking about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the fight, the reckoning. "Maybe this is how it's supposed to work," she whispered. "We burn down what's rotten and rebuild it with light." She stood, walking to the balcony. The city stretched beneath her, glowing with wet reflections, banks, towers, lives continuing. But something was different. The glass no longer seemed untouchable. She saw people outside the River Hill building laying flowers by the steps, a silent memorial, not for her, but for what had been lost. Trust. Elias called that night. "You realize, don't you?" he said. "They used to call it a banking crisis. But this is a moral one." Amara smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're finally investing in the right kind of equity." Lightning flared again across the skyline, illuminating her reflection against the glass. She looked calm, resolute, her face half in shadow, half in light, like the city itself. The fire that had once burned in shame now burned in purpose. Justice had torn through the lies, and though the empire still stood, its walls were transparent now. The truth had become its own kind of fire, slow, unstoppable, and illuminating everything it touched. A week later, the storm had passed, but its echo lingered. River Hill Federal, once a symbol of exclusion, was reopening under federal supervision. News cameras gathered outside, recording what had become a national moment of reckoning. Inside, the marble floors gleamed again, but not with arrogance. The air felt different now, reverent, uncertain, as if the walls themselves knew they were about to witness history. Amara Cole stood at the foot of those grand white steps, wearing a pure white dress, sleek, elegant, powerful. The same shade she had worn on the day of her arrest. But this time, it wasn't to be judged, it was to be remembered. Her hair was pulled into a perfect bun, her chin lifted in quiet defiance. The same woman they had called a fraud now walked with the authority of someone who had forced an empire to confront its sins. Lila stood beside her, holding a black leather portfolio. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Amara took a breath. "I was ready the moment they put those cuffs on me." Across the street, protesters and supporters mingled in unity. Handwritten signs waved gently in the morning breeze. Justice deposited. Power reclaimed. Dignity is wealth. The crowd quieted as Amara began her slow walk up the steps. The sound of her heels against the stone echoed through the plaza, sharp, rhythmic, certain. Inside, the cameras followed her as she approached the same counter where everything had begun. The same cold marble, the same fluorescent lights, but a new teller now, a young man with dark skin, nervous but proud. "Good morning, Miss Cole," he said, standing a little taller. "How can I help you today?" Amara smiled warmly, setting a check on the counter. It was drawn from her company's corporate fund, $5 million, made payable to the Cole Institute for Equity and Innovation. "I'd like to make a deposit," she said softly. The cameras clicked, flashes bursting like fireworks. Reporters leaned forward, capturing the moment from every angle. The irony was poetic. The same woman once accused of fraud was now depositing a sum large enough to rebuild lives. From across the lobby, a familiar figure stepped forward, Chief Investigator Denise Ford. "Miss Cole," she said, shaking her hand firmly. "The Department of Justice wanted me to personally thank you. Because of your testimony, several discriminatory banking policies are being overturned nationwide." Amara nodded. "This isn't just my victory. It belongs to every person who's ever been told they don't belong at the counter." At that, the crowd outside erupted into applause. The sound carried through the glass doors, reverberating through every corner of the bank. Employees peeked from behind partitions, some with tears in their eyes. In a quiet corner, Nadine Turner, the new CEO, watched with pride. She'd spent the last few days rewriting River Hill's code of conduct, line by line, ensuring no one could ever hide prejudice behind policy again. She approached Amara with a small brass plaque in her hand. "We thought this should stay here," she said. Amara read the engraving. "The right to dignity is not subject to verification." Her throat tightened. "Leave it by the main door," she said. "So everyone who walks in remembers what it cost to earn those words." As Nadine nodded, a hush fell over the room. The choir from Amara's father's church, standing by the entrance, began to sing softly, "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." The harmony swelled, filling the marble halls with warmth. People stood together, bankers, activists, journalists, strangers no longer divided by position or color. Amara closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the journey, the humiliation, the anger, the resistance, and now, the rebirth. When she opened them, she saw her reflection in the polished marble. The same woman, but no longer broken. Outside, she stepped into the sunlight, cameras flashing once more. Elias joined her, handing her a folder containing the official federal certification for her new foundation. "It's done," he said. "You've changed the law, Amara, not just the headlines." She looked out at the crowd. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving tiny flags. Older women from the community smiled through tears. A group of young interns from Coal Dynamics stood together, holding a banner that read, "Built from Dignity." For the first time in weeks, Amara allowed herself to exhale. "We didn't just expose them," she said quietly. "We changed the system they hid behind." As she descended the steps, the choir's voices rose higher, merging with the cheers of the people. The sun broke fully through the clouds, golden light spilling across the courthouse dome, across the crowd, across the woman who had redefined what justice could look like. And when she reached the last step, Amara turned back one final time. The plaque gleamed in the sunlight, etched forever into the building that had once humiliated her. She smiled and whispered, "That's interest well earned." The world would remember this day not just as the day a black woman walked back into a bank, but as the day she walked out owning it, body and soul. The city never forgot that morning when Amara Cole walked back into Riverhill Bank dressed in white. It wasn't just a return, it was a restoration. Her story became more than news, it became a mirror. A reminder that power without empathy collapses, that dignity, once taken, can rise again stronger than marble and glass. In the months that followed, the Coal Reform Act passed quietly through Congress, mandating anti-bias training and accountability audits across financial institutions nationwide. Banks that once closed their doors to people who didn't look the part were now required to open them with transparency. It was slow, imperfect progress, but it was progress born from her pain. At the Coal Institute for Equity and Innovation, Amara's name hung not in marble but in the laughter of children learning coding, in the voices of young women reading her case study in classrooms, in the quiet dignity of every person who dared to walk into a place of power and be seen. One evening, months later, Amara stood by the window of her new office overlooking the same skyline where everything had begun. The city glowed, bright, imperfect, alive. Lila entered quietly, holding a framed photo of that fateful day. "You should hang this," she said. Amara smiled, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "Let the memory live where it matters in what we build next." The camera could fade out there, her reflection shimmering in the glass, the city lights behind her like constellations. A woman once doubted, now defining the horizon itself. Because the truth of her story wasn't just about a wrongful arrest or a shattered reputation, it was about a transformation. The day Amara Cole stepped into that bank, they saw a black woman with a check. But when she walked out, the world saw something far greater, a leader who cashed the most powerful currency of all courage.